This opens up some space for them. Rollback of certain policies was almost tailor-made for an Avi Lewis NDP leadership campaign or potentially a draft Guilbeault. Bring them on over.
We've got a bizarre one here. Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today we've got Julie DeBruce, Mark Carney's new environment minister, who took over from Stephen Guilbeault in the last election there, going on CBC where she gets fact-checked by Rosemary Barton. It's a very bizarre thing. We've got a ton of stories here. Let's jump into this. As per usual here, we're starting off with some polling data. This is coming from Abacus Data. Some bizarre polling data in here as we're seeing direction of the country. And Canadians, you see this big spike at the end here, going up to 37%, nearly maxing out at 40% at the highest in the wrong direction. That's what that red means. So Canadians do not like the direction Canada's going. We can see the top issue facing Canadians here. Cost of living is dominating once again. The economy, number 2, healthcare. And look at this, housing and affordability is now moved up. Donald Trump has dropped to number 5 at 32%. But if we look at the government approval, we see Carney spike up from 44 to 48%, and disapproval has dropped. So I guess, I don't know if it's pipeline announcements or measures for steel workers or whatever it may be, something has led to Carney's approval going up a bit here, despite the country going the wrong direction. We've also got impressions of Mark Carney flat, but the negative impression dropping. So that's probably tied to those recent announcements as well. But then we've also got impressions of Pierre Poilievre dropping from 44 to 42, and positive impressions, you can see this was going down and then spiking up now. So this is a really bizarre set of data here. Getting to the poll itself, we've got 41% for the Liberals, 40% for the Conservatives. So you can see just a change of 1%. So it's neck and neck here. So if we did have an election right now, it would be a real coin toss. There's so many stories in the news right now. Let's just rapid fire a few of these. We've got this one here coming from Blacklock's Reporter. It says Quebec's anti-corruption police are now investigating the Quebec Liberal Party. You can see Pablo Rodriguez was in Trudeau's cabinet, decided to leave to head up this party. Now they're wrapped up in this corruption scandal here. It says over an alleged plot to pay people to vote for Rodriguez in the leadership race. Wow. And with that, we're seeing polling coming out of Quebec. Well, Pablo Rodriguez not looking good here. 33 versus 81 seats. We got more news coming out of Ukraine. So we've got Kirk posting this one here where Melanie Joly met with this guy who's wrapped up in this corruption scandal, Ukraine. And with that, we've got America over there right now, I believe in Ukraine. They're trying to sort out a deal so that things can end. And what is Russia doing? They're sending in more pow-pows into Ukrainian cities. Like, this is absolute madness. So jumping between, we got CBC and CTV, different panels here talking to Julie DeBruce. This is Carney's environment minister.
Comfortable are you with the suspension or cancellation of some of the measures that had been there put in place by Mr. Guilbeault before?
Yeah, look, I have a lot of respect for Stephen. I worked with him for about 6 years as parliamentary secretary, so I've worked directly with him, including on files and on the environment.
Yeah.
But I really respectfully disagree with him on his characterization of this memorandum of understanding. I don't see it as backsliding, and
This is so weird. She worked as secretary for him and now is disagreeing with him. What an ugly narrative that Julie has to try to untie.
I don't see it as canceling programs. And I know that specifically, like when we talk about things like the clean electricity regulations, those regulations remain in place. And I feel very strongly about that. And that's why I feel comfortable coming out and speaking with Canadians too.
So Vasi Kapelos asks her about this and basically just fact checks her as if she's pretending to be someone fully in favor of all this net zero stuff. Julie just fumbles and bumbles here trying to get an answer out.
I look at the analysis from the Canadian Climate Institute once again, where it pieced apart the policies by percentage of how much each would lead to reducing emissions by the targets that you set out, ambitious or not, they're in the legislation by 2030. And when you subtract the emissions cap, you're subtracting about 30% of what was going to get us there. When you subtract the fuel charge, you're subtracting about 8 or 9%. So how are you going to displace all of that? Because all your government keeps doing right now, including through this MOU, is rolling back a whole lot of stuff.
So I'll disagree with the characterization that we're rolling things back when we've actually committed to strengthening the industrial carbon price, strengthening methane regulations, extending the methane regulations to landfills, and also to building out infrastructure that in the long term does help us to move towards a cleaner electricity grid.
But you've taken away the emissions cap. I'm sorry, you've taken away the emissions cap. You've taken away the consumer carbon tax. If a conservative prime minister did that, your party would call them a climate change denier.
So on the emissions cap, we have...
This is so embarrassing to watch. They're basically rolling back some of the policies because they don't work. They're destroying our country. And then what are they increasing? The industrial carbon tax, because Mark Carney can then leverage that into the carbon credit system. It's all about money. This has been a grift from day one. Somebody invented this back in the day as a grift, probably from the WF, who knows. They got a bunch of these eco warriors on board to push it, and listen to her try to defend this.
Actually relied on expert advice. And in the budget, it was pretty clear how it was set out, that if we did the steps of strengthening the industrial carbon price, strengthening methane regulations, that there were measures in there, that there was a pathway to be able to remove the cap. And that they
had to roll back all these things, pausing the EV mandate. Remember that? They were going to force all of us to buy EVs starting next year. There would be a small portion, and then all the way up to whatever, 2030, it would be like 100%. But none of this stuff works. Everything was imploding. The auto industry was imploding. Got the entire industry pushing back against them, saying, yo, what are you doing here? Now they're having to admit how awful these policies are. Here she's saying, well, Carney wants to increase the industrial carbon tax 6 times. That's where we'll make it up.
Would the goal be to be at $130 by the end of the decade? Because it was $170 by the end of the decade. Is that?
Yeah. So I have 2 things that I have to do right now. One for the country as a whole, which is actually like where this Alberta agreement fits.
Yep.
Is that we set out in the budget that I have to work on what the trajectory will be for.
They don't know. This is such a train wreck. They have no idea what's going on with anything here. Jumping over to this panel, we got Kathleen Monk mentioning Stephen Guilbeault. I guess there was talk of him going over to join the NDP.
If the Carney kind of adoption of the conservative agenda now makes the Conservatives irrelevant, it actually may make New Democrats more relevant. So we all agree that New Democrats in the last election suffered a brutal blow, but this opens up some space for them. And it almost seems the MOU and the rollout yesterday and the rollback of certain policies was almost tailor-made for an Avi Lewis NDP leadership campaign, or potentially a draft Guilbeault, bring him on over.
They already rejected.
Campaign.
They said, no way.
Yeah. But so if you think of that, this opens up a space for those people who want to see the green climate transition, want to see new energy, an investment in clean electricity, all those things that Carney's saying he'll put on the line, and also are cognizant of the fact that David Eby has done the hard work. This is one fictional project of the pipeline versus 10 real projects that are moving ahead. And
so she's not wrong here. The more Carney moves more to the center, at least in some aspects here of his net zero agenda, because he's basically increasing the portions of it that will benefit him financially the most, the more that opens the left for the NDP to gobble up some seats with eco-climate agenda. Now, I don't know what the situation with Guilbeault is. If he was trying to get in there, he asked and the NDP didn't want him, I'm not sure. But this whole situation is a mess.
And if we want those to move ahead, and that new Democratic government is leading those in BC, you could see a coalition of New Democrats gaining strength and taking back some of those BC seats that the Liberals won in the last election.
Big shift.
Jumping back to CBC, talking about the agreement MOU with Daniel Smith, specifically talking about the clean electricity regulation that'll be rolled back in Alberta only.
They remain in place, but they are paused for Alberta. And as you know, there are other provinces who don't like them either. Saskatchewan is one. How concerned are you that you were going to have to allow for carve-outs for other provinces?
So there isn't actually a carve-out when you read the section of the Memorandum of Understanding on the Clean Electricity Regulations. If I can kind of pull a step back, the way the Clean Electricity Regulations work is that they have a long pace before they actually start taking effect in 2035. And that was to give time for the provinces to be able to plan towards when it's going to be actually applying.
The Pathways Alliance Carbon and Capture Storage Project was a project in and of itself that was being spearheaded by the Alberta government, oil companies, some contributions perhaps from the federal government. Now it is conditional on the pipeline. Why make that choice? Why did they have to be in tandem as opposed to just going ahead with it?
Well, it was a matter of whether they were actually going ahead with it. And I think the idea that we would move ahead, it's only one of our tools, but carbon capture is one of the tools that can help us to reduce emissions. And
nope, it's one of the tools that Mark Carney is going to use to capture more money that goes into his bank account here, being invested in 3 of the companies involved in the Pathways project. Direct conflict of interest. Should be against the law, but apparently it is not.
And so I think that having an agreement from industry, from Alberta, that they will move forward with carbon capture is important. And frankly, it makes sense for them economically to do it.
I want to talk about the industrial carbon pricing. So Alberta is, the government is touting Alberta's commitment to this this plan now that would get them to $130 a ton. But there's no timeline. When will that happen then?
Yeah, so that's part of what we also have to negotiate.
Okay.
Again, April 1st is going to be a busy day because I also have until April 1st to reach an agreement on that. But when you think...
They don't know. They don't know any of this stuff. They just keep repealing regulations, moving things, trimming things down, adding stuff. They have no idea what they're doing here. They're trying to make everything work with the polls, with Canadians, voters. It's not working though, because Canada's economy is tanking.
Think about it, $130 credit price for Alberta is more than 6 times really where they're at right now as their credit price. They're trading at about $20 to $25. And I know that sounds in the weeds, but it isn't economic for moving people towards wanting to invest in low carbon technologies at $20, $25. So getting to $130, making that increase is a really big price signal. It's one of my most important tools to reduce emissions is the industrial carbon price.
Right, but
That's right, forcing Canadians by increasing carbon pricing from $25 to $130 per ton. And remember Mark Carney's announcement there, he got all giddy about, he said something and beyond, I believe, beyond $130 a ton. I think he was insinuating, as in going past that. Our country is run by complete buffoons.
target previously was $170 a ton.
170 is the headline price,
Yeah.
and the credit price usually trades lower than the headline price. And there are a lot of things that still have to get negotiated between Alberta.
This is such a clown show. It's hard to even follow what's going on. So yeah, the previous headline price, the top level was 170. Now they're making the floor 130, even though the actual trading level is 25. They're increasing it 600% up to 130 as the floor. And then the ceiling, I think Mark Carney is just going to completely remove. He's going to blow the ceiling off. So there is no upper ceiling. This is a train wreck. This will only bring more despair in our country. Next up, I need to address a creator coming after me. I don't know what the deal is here. I've never actually had someone on the left come at me so hard before. Ironically, it's someone from the right, basically in regards to pension funds, all this stuff that I've been talking about, these connections I've found, my hypothesis on what I think's happening here with Mark Carney, Goldman Sachs. First off, a big thank you to the many of you that have sent me messages or let me know what's going on here, as well as all the comments backing me and supporting me and all the work I do on my channel here. The argument is I'm essentially making a hypothesis of what I think's going to happen. That's what I do on my channel. I look up stuff, I make connections here, I dig up all the information I can find, and I hypothesize, I infer what I think will happen. And apparently my theory is wrong. Okay, it's freedom of speech. In this case, Mark Carney came out and said himself,
"We will take significant measures to elevate our relationship. The Minister of Finance will lead a delegation of Canada's pension funds, $2 trillion of capital," which almost begins to sound significant in the UAE. $2 trillion in capital, the Canadian pension funds. They will come here next year early to deepen existing partnerships and develop new investment opportunities together.
Develop new investment opportunities together. Is he trying to entice the UAE with Canada pension funds? Even though, as I've said in both of my videos on pension funds, that Mark Carney doesn't have control over the pension funds of Canada, but there are people in those organizations that he has ties to, or that he's friends with, or that he knows, and we already know that because they're already invested in Brookfield. They're already on board with him. Caisse de Dupont, investor in Brookfield Catalytic Transition Fund. This is not my piece of data here, as I'm going to show you here, as well as IMCO, investor in Global Transition Fund 1, which is what Mark Carney will directly make money off of. OTPP, founding investment partner and anchor investor in Brookfield Global Transition Fund, as in one of the first investors, and also the PSP, the Public Sector Pension Board, investor in Brookfield Global Transition Fund 1. So this is beyond speculation. We don't need to speculate. We know that some of these pension funds support Mark Carney's low carbon net zero agenda. And what I've been very clear on, my speculation is that he's going to get people, or he's going to try to get people in all of these pension funds to try to invest in this because it helps enrich himself. So honestly, I'm very confused that a conservative creator would come after me when that doesn't help save Canada. My whole purpose is to help save Canada. For that reason, I'm not going to get involved in the drama. I don't do drama. If you don't know what I'm talking about, great, because drama is not going to save Canada. And me making a big response video and making a thing out of it, it won't help Canadians who are living in their vans or single mothers who can barely put food on the table. I will just stick to what I do, which is digging into Mark Carney and exposing all the stuff he's in. I will not be involved in attacking other creators because that does not help Canada. With all that said, we do have some new information here. Another pension fund I want to draw attention to is OMERS, the Ontario Municipal Employees Retirement System. A lot of money here, $173 million. What do we have right on Anita Nan's declaration information page here. This is the Office of Conflicts of Interest Ethics Commissioner right on the government's own website. This is not speculation, and I have agreed the conflict of interest screen is appropriate, yada yada. And it says here, my spouse, Mr. John Knowlton, Senior Managing Director and Business Manager at OMERS Infrastructure Management. He's also OMERS Administration Corporation, as well as all these other things. So does that mean he have full access to OMERS money and he's going to spend it how he wants? No, just as I said in my other videos, they don't have full access, but they get a vote. They get to influence the decision as best as they can. So once again, there's another person in here who may try to influence the investments on Carney's side. Maybe he says, no, I don't want to be involved in net zero. That's bad for my reputation. That's possible too. But as a Canadian looking what's happening to our country right now, it's unnerving knowing that Anita Nand's husband will have some sort of influence over OMERS infrastructure arm. He's not the CEO, he's not the top of the food chain there at OMERS, but he'll have some influence at OMERS and the infrastructure investments that go on there. On top of that, remember when Anita Nand resigned from the Liberal Party when Trudeau's numbers were tanking? And then Mark Carney came in and begged her to come back. Why would he beg her to come back? If other creators don't agree with what I think, that's fine. They don't have to. I spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours building this out. I feel my track record is very good considering I was the one calling out Mark Carney would be heavily invested in America, and I proved it there. I broke this story, and then the Investigative Journal Foundation came out and verified essentially almost exactly the same results. And based off of all the research I've done, I don't trust this situation. I don't trust these guys. I think Mark Carney's going to be bringing this guy in, Michael Evans. I think Mark Carney knows these guys from the Goldman Sachs days. I don't know that, as I said in my video. I don't have definitive proof of that. I hypothesize based on my research. As I have it written down here, World Economic Forum in 2022, he described this individual carbon tracker. Well, I got the footage of that. Here we have Michael Evans, one of the twin brothers. This is posted by none other than Conservative Andrew Lawton. This was before he was elected as a Conservative MP.
We're developing, through technology, an ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint. What does that mean? That's where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on.
The people laugh, but he was telling the truth. There was no joke there. Now, does Mark Carney know this guy? I don't know. I sure hope not. If I were betting, though, I would say he probably does. He's probably good friends with him. If you work at the same company for more than a decade, even if you're in different departments, you're bound to run into people, especially if you move your way up the corporate ladder. So essentially what I'm looking at here, making these connections, I mean, that's what investigative journalism is. Connecting the dots until you start to see something form, and then looking in those new areas that are forming, we see the pieces come together, and there's missing spots here, connecting the ties. That is essentially part of the investigative journalism, where parts of it are locked in fact and others are not. As for the pension funds, I stand strong on what I believe here, what I think is going to happen. This graphic you can see right here comes from this document, which is from Shift Action, Pension Wealth and Planet Health. It says Canadian pensions vote against shareholder proposal seeking clarity in Brookfield's definition of transition assets. It says at Brookfield's AGM in June, this is posted July 15th, 2025, so 5 months ago, it says nearly all Canadian pension funds voted against Shift's shareholder proposal asking the company to disclose specific criteria for inclusion of assets within its transition labeled funds. Only Ontario's University Pension Plan, UPP, voted for our proposal. Brookfield's transition funds are designed to pool money from institutional investors like pension funds and invest in companies, projects, and technologies designed to accelerate the global transition to net zero. As in every single major pension fund except for the UPP voted against transparency of what the pension funds are being invested in. This is alarming. And that's where they listed this. Why exactly would they do that? Why don't they want us to see what they're investing in? This sends off red flags for me. I don't trust this, and thus I'm going to keep looking into it. Despite someone's opinion of me or not, it doesn't matter. Moving on, and we've got Antifa thugs here in Montreal. As you see, Rebel News getting surrounded by these people. This problem hasn't gone away. We've got liberal activist calls for censoring fitness influencers because they make people right-wing.
Mr. Carollo, as you noted, your work with White Ribbon has long focused on preventing gender-based violence by addressing the social norms and cultural narratives that shape boys' understandings of masculinity. I know next-gen men, who I had the pleasure of meeting yesterday, operate in a similar space. In an article with Globe News Wire about a White Ribbon campaign called My Friend Max Hate, which you refer to in your opening remarks, you state that it's, and I quote, alarming to see the growing impact of the manosphere and how they are conditioning vulnerable populations such as teens, particularly young men. What patterns are you seeing in how algorithmic content and influencer culture are shaping early attitudes towards gender? And what makes these online narratives so effective at pulling vulnerable young men into misogynistic worldviews?
Young boys and young men are looking to the internet, turning to the internet for connection, to learn about dating, to learn about what it means to be a young man, and looking for social supports, and looking to figure themselves out. And as they do these searches, they are presented with these deeply misogynistic and videos and resources put out by these social influencers. We are seeing more and more of that kind of impact, and these young men start to take on those narratives. They start to accept those ideologies, those ways, those narratives, those advices.
Let me guess. Lifting weights? Is that the advice? Is that a right-wing thing now? Is lifting weights? This is so preposterous.
That are often disguised as improving, improving self-esteem, improving their own looks and physique and so forth, but often incorporating deeply misogynistic attitudes.
Did the Liberals have any solution to their problems aside from censorship? No, it's always censorship. There's so many cases of this kind of nonsense. Censorship, as we see here in the UK, this should terrify everyone. What's happening over there? We have a guy who's blind and disabled being arrested because he held up a sign that opposed the UK government.
Anything to say, friend?
Right, so we got some bolos coming up.
This is unbelievable. It's nonstop here. Look, there's a guy being arrested here because of a mean comment on Facebook.
Police station. Right. Okay, this is in relation to some comments that you've made on a Facebook page. Okay.
Oh, really? Oh, it's a Facebook crime, is it?
Okay.
Right.
Like, I get it if he said he's going to end somebody or make some sort of threat like that. If it was a run-of-the-mill comment you'd see on Twitter, like, this is getting ridiculous. This is way beyond anything that should ever be acceptable in any country ever. Censorship is getting wild in Canada. We've got this one here, digital ID, also in the UK. There's an ad here trying to make people who use a normal ID as some sort of clumsy fool.
Their digital ID system that's set to be rolled out next year. And in this video, they attempt to paint anyone who uses a physical ID as someone who's just clumsy and outdated.
Can I get a pint of lager, please? Yeah, of course. Can I just see some ID?
Yeah, no worries.
It's got it somewhere here.
Of course he's got to drop it, because anyone who has a normal ID is going to be very clumsy, right?
Hi, can I have a pint of Christmas cracker, please? So we're changing the law so that next Christmas, young people will have their ID on their phone.
Yeah, you're forcing people to have your ID on your phone so you can track people. We don't want these policies coming to our country. This is why I fight so hard in Canada. I don't want to live in this kind of draconian nightmare.